The Mixed Reality Toolkit is a Microsoft-driven open source project that accelerates mixed reality app development. It provides developers with a wide array of spatial building blocks, components, and features. Think of things like buttons, sliders, panels, things that you'll be able to go in and touch in your mixed reality world. It also allows you to connect to Azure services, things like Azure Spatial Anchors or Azure Cognitive Services, so you can integrate them with your projects. Now, there's a toolkit for Unity, and it's cross-platform. That means you can build experiences for the HoloLens, the HoloLens 2, Windows mixed reality headsets. You can build for OpenVR headsets, ultra-leap hand tracking, and you can also build for mobile devices. There's also a toolkit for the Unreal Engine. This one is in an earlier stage of development, and it's being built as a set of independent plugins that can all work together. When it comes to building things with the Mixed Reality Toolkit, the only limitation is your imagination.
Everyone, welcome and thanks for joining me for this keynote. My name is April Speight and I am the Spatial Computing Cloud Advocacy Lead at Microsoft, as well as the Director of Education and Community Outreach with CyberXR. Today, I'm here to speak with you about the Metaverse, and not necessarily what it is or what it isn't. You can actually head over to Twitter to find out more about those arguments. Rather, I'm here to speak with you all about diversity, inclusion, and safety in creating for the Metaverse. Creating diverse, safe, and inclusive apps and experiences should be a priority for everyone. And while I can't necessarily overlook everyone's shoulder as they are creating for the Metaverse, what I can do is come to platforms such as these to raise awareness and to also provide ideas as to how you yourself can contribute in a more diverse, inclusive, and safe way to what the Metaverse has to offer humanity. Join me today as I take you on a journey through an 8-bit world where we discuss various facets that ties into creating these diverse, safe, inclusive environments for the Metaverse. See you on the other side.
The Metaverse is an amalgamation of ways to virtually connect with one another in augmented reality and virtual reality. As defined by CyberXR, augmented reality overlays digitally created content on top of the user's real-world environment and is viewed through a device, such as a smartphone, that incorporates real-time inputs to create an enhanced version of reality. Whereas virtual reality is a fully immersive software-generated artificial digital environment. VR is a simulation of 3D images experienced by users via electronic equipment such as a head-mounted display. The Metaverse belongs to everyone. It is not owned by any single individual or entity. Rather, we all have the opportunity to create for and enjoy the metaverse. Before we can move forward with entering the metaverse, there's some account creation that we need to get through.
All right, let's have a conversation about user data. Providing information such as your name may actually have a benefit for an app if it's the case that the app takes your name, inserts it where appropriate to better communicate with you to make conversations seem more realistic. There's also your email address, for example, which can be useful for account recovery. And then there's location. Providing your location may enable features that can help better interact with the environment around you. All of this information plus more is known as PII.
Personal identifiable information, referred to as PII, is any representation of information that permits the identity of an individual to whom the information applies to be reasonably inferred by either direct or indirect means. Examples of PII include your social security number, contact information, government issue identification, birth date and birthplace, online information, geolocation, verification data, medical records information, and account numbers.
Now, what may seem like harmless data entry during account creation can actually have negative consequences, such as identity theft or even doxing. But what if you're wearing a head-mounted device or smart glasses? While you may not be inputting information such as your name, there are still risks to consider. Let's take our eyes, for example.
For AR and VR experiences, our eyes give us the ability to view images displayed in front of us. And while it may not seem obvious, it's very much possible to gather information about a person given their eye characteristics. Let's explore what can be tracked directly from your eyes. First, there's the eye opening and closure. This accounts for your blink duration and frequency, as well as the average distance between your eyelids. Next, there's eye movements. This concerns your gaze fixations. To gaze, which is the rapid movement of the eyes between fixation points. In addition, there's smooth pursuit, which describes a type of eye movement in which the eyes remain fixated on a moving object. And finally, there's ocular tremor, which is a neurological disorder of involuntary eye movement. Next, there's the eye status. This accounts for whether your eye is reddened, watery, or dry. We then have pupil properties, which include your pupil size and pupil reactivity. There's also iris characteristics, which reflect your eye color and iris texture.
So these characteristics can make possible inferences about our own personal information. But what inferences, you may ask?
There's your personality traits, mental health, skills and abilities, level of sleepiness, cognitive processes, drug consumption, age, biometric identity, cultural background, physical health, geographical origin, gender, and mental workload.
Now, of course, depending on the app or the use case, the use of eye tracking can be beneficial. For example, a medical VR app that can be used to assess Parkinson's, or enabling eye gaze in a game to accommodate those who experience paraplegia. However, it's imperative to recognize that eye tracking can also be used for malicious activities. For example, let's say there's an algorithm that utilizes iris information to unfortunately exacerbate political polarization, and therefore, when triggered, displays political ads that supports this further divide. This level of data collection goes beyond our eyes. There's also our voice and our body. This collective grouping of data is what is known as biometrics.
Biometrics is the recognition of individual by means of unique physical characteristics such as facial recognition, voice recognition, and body movement. It is also a subset of verification data, which is a part of PII. Let's check out an example of how such data and tracking can lead to unexpected consequences for users. In a 2019 article written by Jessica Outlaw director of the Outlaw Center for Immersive Behavioral Science at Concordia University, and Susan Persky, head of Immersive Simulation Program at the National Human Genome Research Institute. They identified an individual named Riley who played a game which featured a VR maze. Riley used a room-scale setup, so by physically walking around his living room, he could solve problems and visit different parts of the maze. The game was a multi-user experience. Riley's friends were able to join them from their respective locations. If Riley turned his head, he could make eye contact with his friends. He could also give virtual high fives by slapping avatar hands, which gave him the sensation of haptic feedback from his controller. Unfortunately, what Riley didn't know was that the startup who created the game sold users' tracking data. A single 20-minute VR session could record 2 million points of data about his body movement. The startup company didn't just sell user tracking data to one entity. Rather, they sold user tracking data to multiple companies, one being an insurance company. A month after playing the game, Riley was turned down for a new life insurance policy. Riley was confused. He had excellent health. After a long battle of filing appeals for the insurance company's decision, the insurance company disclosed that Riley's tracking data from the VR maze game revealed behavioral movement patterns often seen among people in the early stages of dementia. And unfortunately, our story doesn't end with Riley. Riley's sister, who later applied for a new life insurance policy, was also rejected for life and long-term policies despite never having played the maze game. So why was Riley's sister rejected? Dementia tends to run in families.
So what can we do to ensure that PII is safe and secure in AR and VR? Well, for one, as you're engaging with different apps and experiences, use discretion to determine whether you should provide information that is personal to your own self or even to others. And while it may not be easily identifiable in all cases that data is going to be used for bad, you should take caution before clicking submit. Being asked for consent alone does not get rid of the risk of data being exploited or used for corrupted manners. Think about it. How many times in your life have you thoroughly read a user agreement? They're lengthy, and they're also full of legalese. That legalese can become confusing, as sometimes there is information in which you may give consent to that's within that legalese that will protect the company rather than your own personal safety. As for those of you who are creating for the metaverse, be mindful of the moral dilemma that's at stake should you decide to collect personal identifiable information. And it goes beyond just ourselves. You also need to consider the other partners that we work with, the teams that we build as well. We must ensure that we're all on the right path going forward to ensure that we are collecting data in safe manners. So, with that aside, let's continue entering the metaverse. There's not that many options, are there? Limiting one's options and creating avatars can limit our ability to express ourselves physically in a virtual representation of ourselves the way that we prefer. There's various characteristics to consider when it comes to creating avatars. There's hair, for example. There's skin tone, there's body type, there may be height in some instances, accessories, whether we want to be a human at all or a non-human. There's so many different factors at play here. And unfortunately, it's not always the case that all of these factors are going to be inclusive. Now, while I don't expect you to account for every single characteristic that exists in a person's personification of themselves in a virtual world, what I do ask, however, is that those features that you are enabling people to customize, keep them as inclusive as possible. When we create and then use avatars, we take on what is known as embodiment.
A 2018 Microsoft research report on avatars defined embodiment as what someone experiences when avatars are co-located from in first-person perspective. Participants have the feeling that their own body has been substituted by the self-avatar, and that the new body is the source of sensations. The report notes that embodiment is complex as it not only includes body ownership over the avatar, but also agency, collocation, and external appearance. Despite the multiple variables that influence it, the illusion is quite robust, and it can be produced even if the self-avatar is of a different age, size, gender, or race from the participant's own body.
So, I'll give you an example of how this works.
A 2021 study presented at the CHI Conference on Human Factors in Computer Systems concluded that when using muscular avatars in a virtual reality spin studio, participants completed an intense workout more easily than when they use avatars with less defined musculature. And the effect wasn't just mental. Participants embodying the muscular avatars also had lower heart rates during workouts than when they embodied avatars designed with lower percentages of muscle and higher percentages of body fat. In the study, 24 participants in Germany pedaled on stationary bikes while wearing VR headsets for 20-minute intervals. The participants were evenly split by gender, were college students, and working professionals who did not cycle regularly. For the experiment, they cycled 3 times, once as each of the 3 avatars. The headset showed the participants in a virtual fitness room facing a mirror, which reflected an avatar on a stationary bike moving its feet in sync with the participants. Participants also wore heart rate monitors and rated how much effort they were exerting about every 5 minutes throughout the workout, while their bikes recorded their pedaling frequency. After each workout, participants filled out a survey answering how fit they thought their avatar looked, how fast they thought their avatar was going, and other questions. They also assessed how closely they identified with each avatar, relating to 2 statements. I felt that the virtual body I saw when looking at myself in the mirror was my own body, or I felt as if I had 2 bodies. With muscular avatars, participants felt they had exerted the least effort and had significantly lower heart rates. With non-muscular avatars, they exerted the most effort and had higher heart rates. Researcher Martin Coker of University of Regensburg noted that participants perceived the task less physically intense in one body compared to another. The authors connect their findings to the Proteus effect. This psychological phenomenon, named for the Greek shape-shifting god, describes how people who use an avatar adopt the behavior and attitudes associated with the avatar's characteristics, such as its height or conventional attractiveness. Rabindra Ratan, an expert in human technology interactions at Michigan State University, noted that those characteristics change how you see yourself for a temporary amount of time.
Like experienced in real reality, when we enter these augmented and virtual experiences represented by our own avatars are the very first impression that we're able to make. It's that hourly appearance. And like real life, there are biases that come from the first impression alone. And while some prefer that their avatars reflect a created persona or another non-human entity, there are some who would rather their avatar be a one-to-one virtual representation of who they are in the real world. With limiting factors such as hair, for example, that can make it difficult when, let's say, I'm creating an avatar and the only hair options available are long, straight hair choices, whereas I naturally have curly hair. Same for skin tone. Providing ranges beyond just 3 shades can open a door to more individuals feeling as though they can find a skin tone that better match how they are in the real world. Consider someone, for example, who wears hijab. If they're going through the activity of creating an avatar and they cannot find a hijab to place on their avatar, what do they do then? And what if someone who's in a wheelchair has an ability to create a full body avatar, but then there's no options to actually create the avatar with a wheelchair. What message are we giving in the sense of they can only create characters who are able to physically stand and walk on 2 feet? Think about it. So what can we as creators do? If your app or experience has the ability to create avatars with the features that you are enabling individuals to customize, be as diverse and inclusive in your customization options as possible. So it looks like we're all set up. I think we are ready to now enter the metaverse. It's a tad hard to see, isn't it? Let me adjust the view a little bit. Okay, that's much better. But the problem with that statement is that it may be the case that this new view of the metaverse world that we've just entered may only be better for me, but not for everyone. The concept of vision is an area of accessibility that we must take into account as we're creating visual graphics. Up until this point, I've primarily shown you black and white screens. Now that I've included color, this adds a new layer of complexity and can also make it a challenge for some to see clearly. For those who are blind, the ability to view images, 2D text, and 3D models can be a challenge in both AR and VR.
For example, individuals who are blind may require audio descriptions to understand the environments they encounter, or any text overlay on the screen. But users with other visual impairments may use magnification and color contrast functions to enhance their XR experience.
The Bureau of Internet Accessibility insists that we can apply common design principles in website accessibility into creating XR products that are going to be inclusive to those who are blind or visually impaired. Immersive sound effects, audio descriptions, the magnification of text and images, all these things can help overcome the barriers posed within traditional designs. And much like websites, AR and VR should include appropriate color choice and contrast ratios. The World Wide Web Consortium, also referred to as W3C, recommends that as we're creating accessible AR interfaces to assist with real-world interaction, that we utilize scalable vector graphics, also referred to as SVGs.
The challenge with AR interface design is gathering real-time spatial data into an accessible representation. Through several research studies that focused on the use of SVGs for people who are blind or visually impaired, it was concluded that this particular format is the best option for delivering big data environmental aspects in real time based on either pre-identified information or data gathered from the environment itself.
So what can we do to make our apps more accessible? Utilize resources such as Microsoft's Seeing VR Research Toolkit. Seeing VR provides a set of 14 tools that can enhance a VR application for someone with low vision by providing both audio and visual augmentations. And it doesn't just stop there. There's additional resources available on the web, in which I'll share at the end of this keynote for you to take on and discover on your own. Now that we've entered the metaverse, let's continue on and go join a community. Oh look, we made a friend. I mean, we must obviously have something in common because we're both here in this bits and bytes community, right? Let's go chat with Python user 347 and see what we can learn. not expect that from that person. And I'm sure many of you who enter into virtual spaces don't necessarily expect that same level of abuse or harassment as you're entering in what we believe to be safe spaces. Although these particular experiences may not necessarily be considered real in the sense that they're in a virtual space, the emotions that come with living those experiences are still very real to people. And sometimes when it comes to being in these virtual social spaces, it may be the case that we just don't want to interact with anyone else. Rather, we just want to exist in the space. We want to enjoy what it has to offer, but remain to ourselves. And I think that's totally fine. Let's take an example of what happened last year when my partner and I were watching a basketball game in VR. Our personalities can't be any more different when it comes to social interaction. Whereas my partner's a social butterfly, and for me, it's situational. It really depends. We were sharing a singular VR headset to watch this game in a virtual venue. When my partner had the headset, I could hear him speaking with others that were there, enjoying the game, looking around, having a good old time. And that was great. This virtual venue brought together people from all over the world into one virtual location to all view this game together. Knowing that was the setup, I knew that that was not meant for me. But I also knew that I wanted to watch the game as well. So when the device was handed over to me, I immediately found myself in a dark room in solitude. And why was that? Well, fortunately, this app had the option for me to go into a solo mode, whereas I could still very well view the game. However, there was no one around me. I share all this to say that we all engage differently when it comes to social interactions. And also, sure, you can take the headset off, you can exit the app, but what remains, however, is that psychological scar should you find yourself in a moment of virtual abuse or harassment. Again, those feelings are very much real. Virtual harassment and abuse exists in many forms. And as we enter a time where more and more people within our world will have the ability to interact in virtual spaces, what I do ask is that you provide features that will enable people to feel safe and also that their concerns are being heard in the event there is a need to report any abuse or harassment. While it's a challenge to hold users solely responsible for their behaviors in virtual environments, there are features that you can consider implementing that can hopefully help create these safe environments for everyone. Unfortunately, some of these features are already available today in various virtual platforms and social experiences.
Limiting proximity between users enable users to determine how close they want others to be to them. Enabling moderators to remove users applies to virtual events where a select group of individuals have the capability of making changes to an environment, providing updates, and taking action where necessary during an event. Enabling users to mute other users is a feature that would only apply to what the muting user hears rather than the collective group in an environment. Providing a solo mode is great if someone wants to be among a social experience but avoid detection by others. And also providing an option to opt for a solo experience is great too. Then there's providing the option for users to approve social interactions from other users. Such a feature gives users more autonomy over social interactions. It becomes the responsibility of the user to use their own discretion for approving or rejecting others and engaging with them. And finally, providing ease of access to report harassment or abuse. Rather than create a poor navigation experience to report harassment or abuse, make this option to do so easily accessible.
As for assuring that people are being heard, consider implementing an internal process where reports are triaged and then investigated, and that there is follow-up with the person who submitted the information. And also, finally, that the appropriate action is being taken to rectify the situation. The eSafety Commissioner of Australia provides recommended steps for what to do if someone in an immersive environment threatens, abuses, or harms you or someone in your care. I personally feel that these steps apply to all who engage in virtual social interactions.
Collect and preserve evidence using screenshots or similar methods, unless it shows nude or sexual content of someone under 18 years old. Report to the platform where the threats or abuse are occurring. Block unwanted contact. And finally, seek further support from an expert counseling service. All right, let's return to our virtual world and go try out a game.
But what if I can't physically use a controller? Well, first and foremost, your app shouldn't solely rely on motion controllers. Your user base will likely consist of various users who all have different abilities, rather than a homogenized group of individuals who all share the same abilities.
Here are 3 interaction models and modalities available that can be implemented into your XR apps and experiences. There's hand and motion controllers, hands-free, engage, and commit. Within those models are various modalities such as direct manipulation with hands, point and commit with hands, voice input, eye gaze and commit, and head gaze and commit.
During the design and prototyping phase, it's imperative that you consider how people will be able to interact with your app. This can ensure that up front, you are thinking about how to make your app interactions more inclusive. Not to mention, motion-based experiences are exclusive to those who may not have the ability to move like others.
For example, let's say you're creating an app that requires the player to physically jump over a set of rolling logs. For someone who does not have the ability to stand, their ability to fully experience your app is diminished if you do not provide another means to simulate the act of jumping.
In general, mobility can make or break an experience for someone with mobility impairments.
The University of Melbourne Accessibility of Virtual Environments review concluded that users with mobility impairments may have difficulty using input devices such as motion controllers. Users with mobility impairments may have difficulty using head trackers to adjust roll, pitch, and yaw. And users with severe mobility impairments may find locomotion such as walking or flying difficult. Mobility use cases identified were: as a user with a mobility impairment, I need to be able to adjust time limits so I can complete tasks. As a user with a mobility impairment, I need to use multiple input devices so that I can interact with the environment. And as a user with a mobility impairment, I need a focus indicator so I can identify which element has focus.
The use of adaptive controllers enable individuals with disabilities to participate in app and gameplay in a manner that's suitable for their abilities. However, we're still faced with a challenge.
AJ Ryan, a participant in the 2017 Lucasfilm ILM LABL, the Disability Project's online survey for people with disabilities, wrote a post for ablegamers.org in which AJ expresses their thoughts on accessibility issues with VR. In AJ's response on how to make VR more accessible, AJ noted that games and hardware are being locked to certain manufacturers. AJ shared that what makes solving problems with VR accessibility difficult is the fact that there's multiple kinds of headsets and products, each with their games and hardware. AJ identifies that most suggestions that they make for accessibility might work fine for one kind of headset, but may be impossible for another. And of course, there's button remapping on standard game controllers. However, for those controllers considered to not be standard, button remapping is either a challenge or just can't be done.
So following mobility is hearing. Circling back to the University of Melbourne's Accessibility of Virtual Environments review, there are some drawbacks when it comes to audio.
The first con is audio dialogue requires captions. And the second, sign language is not supported.
The use of auditory cues can truly enhance an experience, making it more immersive. Take spatial audio, for example, which can be used to mimic how sound is perceived in the real world. The sound of an air conditioning unit off in the distance, that slight hum that you would hear. But as you get closer, that sound gradually becomes louder. Auditory cues are categorized into 4 categories: ambient, object, movement, and informational.
An ambient auditory cue can be city street noise. It's the background noise in any given environment. Next, there's object auditory cues, such as air conditioning humming. Sound is produced from an object. Next, there's movement. Footstep sounds are a great example of a movement auditory cue. As we walk in the real world, sound is made each time our foot touches the ground, even if the sound is relatively quiet. And finally, there's informational auditory cues, such as audio instructions.
Each auditory cue serves a unique purpose. However, they're not always as helpful as one may think. Consider the use cases provided by the University of Melbourne as it relates to hearing.
As a user with a hearing impairment, I need to be able to turn off ambient soundscapes so I can hear interface elements such as clicks, bleeps, and transitions. As a user with a hearing impairment, I need visual or haptic equivalents of oral interfaces so I can interact with interface elements. As a user who hears better in one ear, I need to be able to control the location of spatialized audio so I can hear interface elements. And finally, as a user with a hearing impairment, I need captions of dialogue so I can read what is being said.
And while the considerations I presented to you today around interactions, mobility, and hearing are not an exact exhaustive list of all the ways accessibility must be taken into account as you're creating your app, I do encourage you to take those items into consideration, plus more. And if you're not sure whether you're on the right track, have a diverse group of users test your app, because an homogenized group of users, it's going to limit you, and you'll likely not be able to uncover any particular issues that may need to be addressed before you deploy and publish. So this game, I think I'm gonna go ahead and invite my friend Eric. Let's invite him into the metaverse and take it from there. Oh, I was sure that he was on this platform, but now that I think about it, I don't even think he has a headset. And it would probably be very unfair of me to ask him to go buy a headset just so we can play together. And that is going to be the reality for many people. While the concept of the metaverse is likely here to stay, it's worth pointing out that not every individual on this planet will be able to access the metaverse, create for the metaverse, take part in the metaverse, and the many facets that comes with this ideology of metaverse. It's due to a lack of resources and digital technologies spread across the world. It's a problem that we have yet to resolve in this day and age, and it's a problem that we cannot expect the metaverse to resolve on its own.
Take the personal computer, for example. The personal computer was introduced in 1975. Prior to 1975, computers were large, expensive, and operated mainly by big companies. At the time, the average price for a personal computer was USD $500. Given inflation, that's equivalent to $2,500 today. And while that may seem normal for some of you who are in possession of beefed up, spec'd out computers, $2,500 was a lot of money back then. Even now, that amount is still considered to be a lot of money for various individuals across the globe, and most importantly, marginalized communities. The 70s was a busy decade because that's when the mobile phone was introduced. One of the first commercial mobile phones, the Motorola Dynatac, was priced at just under USD $4,000. That's the equivalent of $10,200 today. So if you thought the personal computer was expensive, mobile phones one-upped the device. And then there was the internet. The beauty of the internet is that it provided a means to digitally connect with one another across our personal computers and mobile phones. As we think about the metaverse, the internet and hardware such as our personal computers, mobile devices, VR headsets, and devices with AR capabilities will come together to deliver the expectations of what the metaverse has to offer.
The digital divide is no less evident today than it was in the 70s when the mobile phone and the personal computer came to market, later followed by the internet. And despite decreases in prices as well as access across various locations, there's still a significant gap in overall ownership. This digital divide became even more evident at the start of the coronavirus pandemic.
In 2020, the World Economic Forum reported that almost half of the world's population has no access to the internet, and that fewer than 1 in 5 people in the least developed countries are connected. And this doesn't just impact the least developed countries. In the United States, 6% of the population, which translates to 21 million people, have no high-speed connection. For Australia, the figure is 13%. In total, 3.7 billion people do not have internet access. And unfortunately, a majority of people without internet access are in poorer countries. The same goes for hardware.
So why is there a belief that the metaverse will positively change the world? The metaverse will positively change only a percentage of the world. This lack of access is going to severely leave others out of the ability to take part in what the metaverse has to offer. A concept that more or less runs on the very technology that's disproportionately distributed across the world can only be enjoyed by those with access. The solution is not to disregard those who will not be able to take part in the metaverse. There are various factors at play that point to why these individuals, these groups, these communities do not have access to technology. Therefore, we cannot collectively blame them for not having access. But what can we do? There's a significant amount of course correction that needs to continue to take place towards diminishing the digital divide. And while we can't expect all problems related to technology access to be resolved overnight, what we can do is provide access to hardware and materials so that way we can mitigate exclusionary practices. And this goes beyond hardware. There's also a lack of access to materials for learning, so that way those within marginalized communities can create, so they can just learn how to do the very things that most devs may take for granted, given that they already had access to what they needed to learn. There's a disproportionate distribution of access to materials to learn and create. Marginalized communities are impacted on so many fronts, with education being one large area that can have a significant impact on one's ability to overcome their own social disadvantages. As I look across the industry and the communities that do and do not have educational opportunities in place, it's disheartening to come to the realization that marginalized communities will unfortunately continue to be left behind as the metaverse evolves. However, I do think those governments, companies, communities, as well as individuals who have taken the effort to help overcome this issue. Let's work together as an industry to close the gap in access, be it internet, hardware, or even XR education opportunities. While I don't expect things to change overnight, I do believe that there are power in numbers. And if we all do our best, we can help make a difference for everyone to contribute, create, and take part in the metaverse. So there you have it, folks. I hope you enjoyed your journey with me into my own personal metaverse. Whether you're an investor, a creator, a person who just loves to play games, or you're just here to learn more, I hope you take what I've shared today